We good to go? Excellent. Well, it's lovely to be here with Mary Wooldridge, the Chief Executive Officer of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. And before I begin, I'd like to thank Mary and her team for the extraordinary amount of work that goes into these big publications of data. As you will have seen in the briefings you've had and the release today, this is a significant release of data about what's going on in Australian workplaces, and in particular what's going on in relation to addressing the gender pay gap. We've made no secret since coming to government that addressing women's economic equality in this country has been a key priority for the Albanese Labor government. It's, I guess, put together in having the Minister for Finance as the Minister for Women to make sure that a lot of the policies about driving equality is done from the centre of government, and that we're looking at every which way we can to make sure that women get a fair crack at the opportunities when it comes to women and work. And closing the gender pay gap has been fundamental to that. I think, and I'll hand to Mary in a moment, I just wanted to make a few introductory remarks. I think overall there's been good progress towards closing the gender pay gap, and over the last couple of years we've had some significant investments in industries where women dominate, so aged care in relation to the aged care wages, early education and care for those workers, but also supporting wage increases for workers on the minimum wage, again, where we see lots of women. And we've seen that women are now earning $217 more per week than when we came to government in May 2022 as a result of some of those policies. The release today is the second release of this transparency data about what's happening in individual businesses and employers across the country. And again, Mary has all the detail, but the important takeouts for me was that more employers reduced their gender pay gap this year. The size of the gaps are coming down, and importantly, which was part of the reason why we wanted this data out there, we're seeing more and more employers engage in what's happening in their businesses themselves, engaging with staff, but also doing some analysis about what's driving some of those outcomes across their companies. And I think all three of those things are welcome. There is always more to do, and I think part of this addressing the gender pay gap has always been uncovering what's going on, and this data allows that to happen. I'll hand to you, Mary.
Fantastic. Thanks, Minister. And it is an exciting day for us at WGEA, and I think for the Australian community as a whole. And there has been a lot of momentum for improving gender equality in our workplaces. That's motivated by both economic and social reasons. Our business leaders know that they need the best talent in their workplaces. They also know that it's good for their bottom line. But it's also consistent with our belief about a fair go and equality of opportunity. Our gender pay gap has been coming down slowly over time, and so as you heard from the Minister, there have been a suite of measures that have been put in place to accelerate change. But publishing employer gender pay gaps is a really important part of that, and even though it's early days for this reform, it's already having a positive impact. Last year, 56% of companies improved their average total remuneration gender pay gap. We've also seen a big increase in the number of companies doing a gender pay gap analysis to understand what's driving gender differences in their workplaces, and more employers are consulting with their employees about their experiences at work. These are critical actions that underpin action taking on gender equality in the workplace, and they're critical for driving change. We know that executives and directors are seeking to learn more about the gender pay gap and what's driving it, and conversations at board level are happening much more substantially now that WGEA reporting results are required to be provided to them. We're also getting feedback from prospective employees that they're asking about a company's gender pay gap in job interviews, and that comes in the context of recently released research by Our Watch that says that a company's approach to gender equality is an important consideration for 3/4 of job-seeking women and nearly half of job-seeking men. So today is the second time that WGEA is releasing employer gender pay gap results, and we take another step forward in terms of transparency of the employer gender equality experience and their performance. So we've released 9,500 company and corporate group gender pay gaps, covering 5.3 million employees. And for the first time, you can look through a corporate group structure to the individual employers within them. We've also added average gender pay gaps in addition to the medians that we published last year, and we're publishing average total remuneration by quartile in addition to the composition quartiles. And this is really important because the gender pay gap is about the result of gender differences in both pay and composition in a workplace. And that's why we've published both of these results by quartile. And it's important to restate, and I can't state enough, that the gender pay gap is not the same as equal pay for equal work. That's been the law for over 50 years. The gender pay gap measures something quite different. So let me give you a few headline numbers. Currently, 50% of employers have a gender pay gap larger than 12.1% in favour of men, and we call that the median employer gender pay gap. There's a high level of variation and individual challenges within different industries. For example, in the construction industry, the midpoint of employer gender pay gaps is 25.3%, while in healthcare and social assistance, it's 3.7%. 72% of employers have an average total remuneration gender pay gap significantly in favour of men. That means more than 5% in favour of men. And 6.5% have a gender pay gap significantly in favour of women. That's a gender pay gap less than -5%, which leaves 21% in our target range of plus or minus 5% in terms of their gender pay gap. And while the aspiration is, of course, to get a gender pay gap to 0, it's important to have that target range to allow for the normal fluctuations in an employer in terms of recruitment, promotion and resignations and so on. And when we look at both the average and the median gender pay gaps, only 15% of employers are in the target range for both of those measures. But that's over 1,100 companies that are already meeting those benchmark performances, which is quite significant. And we do expect these results to improve as we continue to publish gender pay gaps each year. The new information that WGEA has published today will help spur conversations, analysis and insights about the barriers that men and women face in the workplace as they go to work or that they seek to find a job. And we believe it's also a catalyst for employers to implement evidence-based practice that can and should be undertaken to remove the barriers that impact people's ability to participate in the workforce, to earn a fair wage and to fully utilise their skills and capabilities. The solutions can be complex, but they are doable. And the key thing that employers need to ask are, what is it about our workforce that is driving the gender pay gap? What barriers do we need to remove so that women and men can work and earn at all levels in our organisation? And how do we ensure that our workplace is safe and fair? Today's results will be challenging for some, but they are a reflection of the experience of employees in the workplaces across Australia. Closing the gender pay gap matters to women and men in Australia who feel its impact through the loss of opportunities and the limitations on their earnings. And it matters to employers who seek to be as competitive and innovative as they can be and to widen the talent pool from which they recruit. Today's step is another step in the path of public accountability and is an important contributor to accelerating positive change to remove the gender pay gap and to enhance gender equality in Australian workplaces.
Thanks, Mary. Can I just say two more things before I go to questions? One, to thank all of you for the coverage that you've provided this data release. It's been significant and, you know, for an old-time feminist actually reading the papers and the media stories today and getting the level of coverage that we have on the gender pay gap is really heartening. So thank you very much. The other point I just want to make is the next logical step from this transparency release or this data release is the bill that's currently before the Parliament, which formed part of recommendations from a review of the WGEA Act, which recommended setting of targets for large companies, setting of targets about areas they wanted to improve. So after they've done the analysis, they've provided the information, how do we get that change happening within organisations? And the ability for companies to set targets and then measure their performance against that target. This was all agreed and had been bipartisan, tripartisan, whole of Parliament supported until the last month, when Peter Dutton has reversed his position on that and said it's too burdensome on companies to support that reform. This is the next logical reform. This will help drive the work that Mary and her colleagues are doing to close the gender pay gap. But after years of bipartisan support, Peter Dutton and his team are now opposing those reforms, and I imagine we can all understand why in this current environment, but I would urge him to reconsider that and put the interests of women and women at work number one before his own self-political interest. Happy to take some questions.
Ms. Wooldridge, first to you. Has the rise of working from home over the last few years had an impact on